After sleeping for an unknown length of time, Shen Qingqiu finally awoke, more dead than alive. Opening his eyes to the sight of the familiar white gauzy curtains above his head, he knew that he was on Qingjing Peak, his quiet and peaceful residence. He took a deep breath, wanting to stretch, when he suddenly realized that the door had opened and someone entered. Mingfan held a tray in both hands. Seeing Shen Qingqiu awake, he dropped the tray on the table and started to bawl.
Shizun, you finally awake!
Another person was still standing outside. Luo Binghe lingered by the entrance like he wanted to come in, yet he hesitated. Mingfan sobbed for a while, soaking a large patch of the bed sheet before turning over his shoulder.
Why are you standing here? Don't you know that seeing you annoys Shizun?
He rebuked Luo Binghe. Then he said to Shen Qingqiu,
I don't know what is wrong with this kid. He insisted on planting himself here like some kind of stick. He won't leave no matter how much I try to shoo him away.
Shen Qingqiu waved his hand. No matter, let him.
Bai Peak, Marshal Uncle Liu said to tell him when you woke up. I'll go straight to Marshal Uncle Liu, Elder Marshal Uncle Mu, and the sect head.
After finishing, he rushed up and out the door. It seemed to Shen Qingqiu that he'd slept for a very long time. Yue Qingyuan had already returned. As for Marshal Uncle Mu, that had to be Qiancao Peak's Mu Qingfan. Qiancao Peak specialized in medication and was proficient in healing arts, so his presence made absolute sense. Luo Binghe let Mingfan pass, but even after Mingfan had gone a distance, he wouldn't leave his spot. He only stared fixedly into the room, his fist clenched tightly the entire time. Shen Qingqiu slowly sat up. Do you have something to say? Then come in. Luo Binghe complied and entered the room. With a sudden thump, he fell to his knees before the bed. Shen Qingqiu stared at him in alarm. Wait a moment, sister, what's going on? All I did was sleep for a bit, and how did things end up like this? How long have I been asleep for? Is it like 10 years in the future or something? From his kneel, Luo Binghe raised his head, gazed fervent and full of guilt. Shizun, please forgive this disciple's foolishness and ignorance up until now. Foolishness and ignorance? You could describe a lot of people with those words, but certainly not Luo Binghe, right? Originally, this disciple was under the impression that Shizun didn't care about him at all. Only after the third match did I understand what painstaking efforts Shizun had put into me. Oh, no. Your original master really didn't care about you, Shen Qingqiu thought desperately. He earnestly wished you dead, really. Although, exactly what painstaking efforts of mine have you noticed? Say it out loud, I'm very curious to know. But Luo Binghe did not continue speaking on this topic. He only said with earnesty, From this day forth, this disciple will devote himself to carrying out his duty and serving Shizun with all his heart, obeying only Shizun's esteemed commands. Shen Qingqiu studied him with a complicated expression. All that past mistreatment and abuse, completely forgotten because he'd saved Luo Binghe once, weren't these favor points a little too easy to farm? To no surprise, at that time he was unable to understand the course of Luo Binghe's thoughts, with their hundreds and thousands of twists and turns. Shen Qingqiu was silent for a moment. As long as you understand, first, why don't you get up? Shen Qingqiu said. He still didn't understand this in the slightest. Binghe, why exactly did you realize? He watched Luo Binghe slowly stand, yet the boy remained unwilling to leave. Instead, he seemed bashful, as if there was still something he wanted to say. Is there something else? Shen Qingqiu asked. Shizun has slept for many days and only just woke up, said Luo Binghe. I was wondering, do you perhaps have an appetite? In truth, strictly speaking, Shen Qingqiu had long held himself in a state of inertia. Even if he didn't eat, he would be fine, but he was unable to resist his nature, which craved good food. As soon as he heard there were things to eat, his eyes shone with desire. Quite a bit, very much so, he said. For the past few days, every couple of hours, he'd remade a serving of congee, and now it could finally be put to use. After bringing the congee to the table, still steaming hot, Luo Binghe helped Shen Qingqiu sit up on the bed, so solicitous it made the hair on the back of one's nape stand up. He came just short of spoon-feeding Shen Qingqiu, and a streak of goosebumps ran down Shen Qingqiu's forearms. He ate a few mouthfuls, using the ladle himself, and all the while Luo Binghe remained standing by his bedside, silently watching him. Shen Qingqiu thought for a moment when he was hit by sudden realization. "It's quite good," he said, reservedly offering a few words of praise. It wasn't just quite good. Even Qingjing Peak's name, clear and tranquil, told you that this branch tended towards the fresh and light, and the style of their cooks followed this same principle. After eating their food for so long, Shen Qingqiu's taste buds had become as dull as dishwater, even though the bowl in his hand was full of mere congee. Perhaps it was an issue of ingredients and technique, but compared to the watery, meager congee he had been fed recently, it was on an entirely different level. Snow-white congee rice, finely chopped scallions, deliciously minced pork, and shredded ginger in just the right amount, all at perfect temperature. It had been too long. Shen Qingqiu's body wanted nothing but to weep. At this praise, Luo Binghe's eyes shone. "If Shi Zun likes it, may I give it to him every day with variations?" he asked. Shen Qingqiu choked on the spot. Luo Binghe rushed to pat his back. Shen Qingqiu waved him off, expressing that he was fine. He was only a little shocked. Luo Binghe's excellent cooking skills were his foremost lady-killing technique. Shen Qingqiu had never thought that he would have the rare honor to eat as only a few key harem characters in the original work got to. Ha ha, cuisine à la Monsieur Luo. Even more shocking was that line. That line. "I'll give it to you every day, with variations." Wasn't that what Luo Binghe had used to coax several spoilt young ladies into willingly and ecstatically entering his harem? Eating whatever you want is fine, but saying whatever you want is not. As Shen Qingqiu's expression had grown strange, Luo Binghe was slightly uneasy. "Shi Zun dislikes it?" he asked. "You made me free food. Whoever dislikes that would be an idiot." "This master likes it very much. From today onward, I'll leave it to you," Shen Qingqiu said amiably. Finally, he didn't need to resign himself to eating that insubstantial watery fare. As the so mighty Qingjing Peak Lord, why didn't he have the privilege of a private kitchen? Having received approval, Luo Binghe once again blossomed like a spring flower. Shen Qingqiu watched him bloom, and without knowing why, his hand suddenly itched, wanting to pat his head again. Was it possible that Binghe's head had some special magnetic field? That would explain why he couldn't control himself. After sending a happily beaming Luo Binghe away, returning his goodwill by using him as hard labor, Shen Qingqiu called the system. "Oi, system, is the scenario at the endless abyss unavoidable?" he asked. "If Luo Binghe fails to complete the endless abyss scenario, 10,000 satisfaction points will be deducted," said the system. Upon hearing that number, Shen Qingqiu once again, out of habit, spat out a fountain of blood. Afterward, he wiped his mouth. Whatever. He'd spat out so much blood that he was used to it at this point. This was eminently logical. If Luo Binghe wasn't shoved into the endless abyss, then he wouldn't be able to activate his golden finger. If the protagonist couldn't become overpowered, then where was the satisfaction? Therefore, the endless abyss scenario was unavoidable, and as this novel's #1 loser, #1 scum villain, the execution of this glorious task naturally, absolutely, inescapably fell to Shen Qingqiu. Yet, unwilling to resign himself to this fate, Shen Qingqiu asked again and ended up sighing, still unable to give up completely. Luo Binghe, who was currently like a little son, was destined to fall and become that brooding, cold-blooded demon youth. Even a transmigrator like Shen Qingqiu, who by all rights ought to have access to cheat powers, was unable to change this inevitability. He had been designated to be the man who threw the protagonist into the endless abyss, thereby catalyzing his overpowered, legendary journey. This job's opportunity for growth were really terrible. If Shen Qingqiu failed to do this, he would lose 10,000 satisfaction points. He couldn't become more thoroughly dead than that. But if he did do this, once Luo Binghe activated his golden finger, he definitely wouldn't let him off. The work was difficult, the pay was meager, the benefits were non-existent. What the hell was up with this? Luo Binghe hadn't left for long when several Shen Qingqiu's sex siblings came to visit. Shen Qingqiu previously was laying on the bed reading a novel hidden inside a copy of the Taoist Sutra. When Yue Qingyuan entered, he shut the books without missing a beat so that the novel was tucked inside, with the Taoist Sutra cover proudly exposed. He tried to get off the bed, but Yue Qingyuan hurriedly stopped him. "Don't move so carelessly," he cautioned. "You shouldn't leave the bed yet. Just keep lying down." Yue Qingyuan turned behind him to Mu Qingfan. "Mu brother, please come and take another look." While Shen Qingqiu was unconscious, Mu Qingfan had already diagnosed him and provided treatment. This visit was likely for further prognosis. Shen Qingqiu held out his wrist. "I'm troubling Mu brother," he said politely. Mu Qingfan startled briefly, but he nodded, sitting by the bed and putting his fingers on Shen Qingqiu's pulse. With his medical expertise as Peak Lord of Qiancao Peak, no matter how complicated the case, he only needed an instant to make a diagnosis and provide a prescription. But he conscientiously remained there for a long while before finally removing his fingers, his expression solemn. "How is he?" Yue Qingyuan asked. As a patient in question, Shen Qingqiu showed no restraint. "So, can this poison be cured or not?" Liu Qingge shook out his sleeves, sitting down next to the table with a humph. "It's called without a cure. What do you think?" Shen Qingqiu sighed. "Then, Mu brother might as well tell me. How many years do I have left? How many months? How many days?" Mu Qingfan shook his head. "Even though it's without a cure, its effects can be suppressed." His voice was even, neither quiet nor loud, but Shen Qingqiu felt like he'd hit the jackpot. Even though this poison was called without a cure, in truth, there was a remedy. In the original work, at the Immortal Alliance Conference with its twist after twist, a lovable, graceful, and subdued little female disciple from another sect was hit by this rare poison. However, importantly, she was a protagonist's woman. Was there ever a stallion novel where the male lead let his own woman be poisoned to death? If there was, he would be a terrible protagonist, and that would be a shitty failure of a stallion novel. Haha, the cure was incredibly simple. Let us review the developments in the original work. Due to the irresistible power of plot, in order to save the male lead, whom she'd known for less than 2 hours, that graceful little female disciple let herself be hit by a demon's underhanded trick, and the poison contaminated her body. Luo Binghe felt an absolute obligation to save her, and therefore he took on the burden of looking for a cure for the graceful little female disciple. It just so happened that deep within the mountains where the Immortal Alliance Conference was being held, there grew a mythical 1,000-year-old flower. Sorry, Shen Qingqiu had already forgotten exactly what the name was, whatever flower, whatever leaf, because the number of mythical flowers in proud immortal demon Wei numbered at least in the hundreds, and every single one was at least 1,000 years old. And when you added all of these mythical grasses and mythical trees, who the hell could remember all those names? Airplanes shooting towards the sky. Do you think mythical flowers are like Chinese cabbages on sale? Leave mythical flowers at least a little bit of dignity that comes with being rare and precious. So, back to the original Luo Binghe. He was sure this legendary flower would cure the poison within the female disciple. He put a tremendous amount of effort into picking it for her. Just doing that took 3 days, 30 chapters. For those 3 days, they journeyed to pick the flower while fighting monsters, and through exchanging flirtatious glances, they developed a deep sense of camaraderie. By the time Luo Binghe finally managed to pick the flower, the graceful little female disciple's condition had worsened, her entire body fragile and devoid of strength. Once they found the flower, the two were overjoyed, and she quickly ate the flower raw. However, it was ineffective. The poison wasn't cured. Their hearts sank. The girl thought, "Since I'm about to die, I must leave behind some memories to ensure that my life won't have been in vain. I don't have many days left after all, so I won't suppress my feelings any longer." Then, using her weak and fragile body, she pushed Luo Binghe down. Luo Binghe put up a brief show of resistance before telling himself, "She did it all for my sake. I don't have the heart to reject her final wish." He yielded, still half reluctant, and went along with it. Then, in the end, how was the poison cured, you ask? After the down and dirty scene, the girl's poison was naturally cured. Was it ridiculous, cliché, implausible? Hey, but it was satisfying, right? Ridiculously satisfying. So ridiculously satisfying. Look, Luo Binghe was both human and demon blood, right? And the demon half of his bloodline came from their #1 saintly ruler, from the heavenly demons of the old. A wee little demonic poison wasn't even strong enough to get stuck between Luo Binghe's teeth, and he instantly absorbed and digested it during their, Incidentally, he even absorbed the nutrients of the mythical flower the girl had just eaten, and so his martial ability once again made great progress. Shit! The so-called protagonist's privilege was that even if he stepped in dog shit, there would probably be a hidden scroll elixir within it.